and welcome to the latest sew along for my digital pattern 1001, which is a wide leg jumper with a slim leg option. Now if you need some information on how to read the PDF and or how to cut and tape the PDF together, there's a video which is linked in the description box below. Now if you don't already have this digital pattern and need to purchase it, you can also click the link in the description box below. Now let's get started. Okay, so you're going to need your sleeve and you're going to be cutting out 2 of fabric. You're going to need your collar and you're going to be cutting out 2 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. You're going to be cutting out your pocket flap. You're going to cut out 4 of fabric and 2 of interfacing. You're going to cut your pocket out, 2 of fabric. And now for this particular sew along, I'm doing the slim leg version, but the sewing is pretty much the same whether you're doing the slim leg or the wide leg. The only difference is that this slim leg has a cuff which you can choose to fold or not fold at the end of the sewing. Now if you're going to be doing this one, you're going to need pattern piece number 2 and 1, which is your full back and your full front, and you will have the slim leg. If you're going to be doing the wide leg, then you would have taped together a couple more pages and your leg would of course be going out like this. And like I said, the sewing is pretty much the same. Now once you have your fabric cut out and those pieces interfaced, you're also going to need a 22-inch invisible zipper and either 2 snaps or 2 buttons. Now we're going to start with our front and we're going to put in our invisible zipper. So to make things easier on yourself, go ahead and serge the full center front of both your front pieces, and then go ahead and also serge the center back of both your back pieces. Now once you have done that, we're going to go ahead and pin this together and attach our invisible zipper. So what you're going to do is we're going to pin the full center front, right sides are facing, and you should have a little dot or a marking where your size stops. So we're going to sew our crotch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we're going to sew using a 2.5 length stitch until we get to your dot. Then you're going to back stitch at your dot, and we're going to switch from your 2.5 stitch to a basting stitch, and you're going to continue sewing all the way up. Now if you need to transfer that line, that stitching line that was on your pattern, go ahead and do so. I already have a little marking that I can see on mine. Now we're going to go ahead and take this to the sewing machine and stitch. Okay, so we're going to start at the crotch and we're going to be using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning. When you reach your dot, make sure and stop and backstitch. Now I'm going to switch to a basting stitch of 5.0. You're going to use whatever longest stitch is possible on your sewing machine. And then I'm going to continue following my guide. And backstitch just a little. Now go ahead and grab your invisible zipper so we can attach it. So I went ahead and pressed my seams open, and now everything is to the left of me except this one side. So make sure that the only thing you're working on is your seam allowance. So you're going to go ahead and place your zipper with the right side facing the right side of your fabric, and you want your zipper top to extend at least by 1 inch so the zipper pull is completely out of your way. And you want to align the middle of your zipper with your seam line. I'm going to go ahead and pin. I'm going to switch out my presser foot for my zipper foot. And I'm just going to baste this down, right? Because I just want to hold my zipper in place. And then I'm going to continue making sure that the middle of my zipper is along the seam. And backstitch. Now you're going to turn this whole thing around and you're going to work on the other seam. So working only on your other side seam, we're going to stitch from the bottom up the same way. Now go ahead and open this back up, and you're going to remove your basting stitch from your center front. You're going to continue opening it up until you get to where we switched from that 2.5 to that 5.0. Now go ahead and open up your zipper. And try and move your zipper pull out of the way. I like to pull it from underneath. And now we're going to stitch again. So again, working on just one side of the zipper. Now we're going to be stitching in a normal length stitch, and we're going to be sewing close to the zipper teeth. So as you can see, when you pull on your zipper teeth, they kind of open a little bit, and so that's where you want to be. So slowly open your teeth and sew. And back stitch. Now we're going to turn this over again, and we're going to sew the other side the same way. Now you can go ahead and close your zipper. Okay, once you have your invisible zipper already put in, then you're going to go ahead and make the darts for your front. And then the next thing is to work on your pocket. So go ahead and make your darts. And then I'm going to show you how I did my pockets. So for your pocket flap, you're using one interfaced pocket flap and one non-interfaced pocket flap. You're going to stitch around using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then you're going to trim your seam allowance the way you saw me do here, or the way you see here. I'm going to trim a little bit more on those corners. And then when you turn your pocket flap to the outside, the right side, you're going to push out all your corners, give it a nice press, and then you have the option of top stitching using either a coordinating thread or maybe a yellow thread if you're doing denim, which is what I'm going to do. So go ahead and do your pocket flaps. And then for your pocket, you're going to turn over 1 inch the way you see here, and you're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and continue your stitching all the way around so it becomes your guide. Once you do that, you're going to push your corners out, and then you're going to give it a good press, making sure that you follow your guide and press 5/8 of an inch along both sides and the bottom of your pocket. Once you have both pockets done, we can go ahead and place them on the front of our jumpsuit. Okay, so I went ahead and top stitched my pockets and my pocket flaps. Now, however much top stitching you decide to do is really up to you. I'm working with denim, so I want some yellow top stitching. So I went ahead and did both my pockets and both my flaps, and now I'm going to pin them onto my front. So you should have 4 dots. You should have 2 dots where your flap is going to be placed like this, and then you're going to stitch and then of course fold it over and top stitch, and then you have another two set of dots where you're going to place your pocket. You're going to pin your pocket, and then you're going to edge stitch around your pocket. Okay, so I went ahead and attached both my pockets and my pocket flaps, and I'm going to do my snaps when I'm finished. So I'm going to set this aside for just 1 second. I want you to go ahead and sew together your center back seam the way I did here. You're going to sew it using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Press your seams open. I clipped along my crotch. And now I'm going to lay front to back, right sides facing, and I'm going to stitch at my shoulders and at my inseam. So go ahead and pin your shoulders. And then I want you to go ahead and pin your inseam. So matching your center front and your center back seams, I want you to pin there first. And then you're going to pin all the way down your inseam. And now what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and stitch your shoulders using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I also want you to stitch your inseam, but I want you to do it from the center down one leg and then from the center down the other leg. Okay, once you've stitched together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, your shoulders and your inseam, I want you to go ahead and do what I've done and baste together your entire side seam. So I just pinned my entire side seam and I did a basting stitch because I want you to go ahead and try it on and see if there's any areas either in the bust, the waist, or the hip area that you need to either take in or let out. And so once you do that, once you figured that out, then go ahead and make any changes and use a regular 2.5 length stitch and then secure your entire side seam once you've done your fitting. Okay, I did all the fitting I needed to do and I went ahead and serged and finished my side seams. So go ahead and set your jumpsuit aside for just 1 second. We're gonna work on our collar. So I have already pinned my collar with right sides facing. One is interfaced, one is not interfaced. And we're going to stitch using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we're gonna do 3/8 along the side and then 3/8 along the bottom. Okay, I've stitched down my sides and down the bottom of the collar, and so now I'm going to go ahead and trim my corners. Go ahead and point out your corners. Use your point turner or something to poke that little corner out. Go slow because you don't want to pierce your fabric. Now I want you to go to your ironing table. I want you to press your inseam as far in as you can get open. I want you to press your seam open as far in as you can get. And then if you are top stitching or you want to top stitch, then you would top stitch across the sides and the bottom using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we're going to go ahead and attach our collar to our jumper. Okay, I went ahead and top stitched my collar and now we're going to attach it and sew it to our jumper. So I'm going to pin in my center back first. And then I'm going to pin, making sure that the end of my collar is against my zipper, right? So leaving just a little tiny space there. I'm going to turn this over, turning the facing onto the collar. And I'm going to pin. And then I'm going to pin in between those two spaces. And then do the same thing on the other side. So make sure that your collar reaches your zipper, fold over your facing, and pin. And then pin in between the center back and the front. And now I'm going to take you over to the sewing machine and I'm going to have you stitch using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now I know I said 3/8, but I'm actually going to be using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to start sewing from the center out one side and then from the center out the other. I don't want you sewing from one end to the other because you're going to stretch your collar. So I'm going to start at the center back and work my way in each direction. Back stitch. And now I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to work again from the center front to the other end. Back stitch. Now go ahead and trim your zipper and then serge the raw edge. Now you can go ahead and press your collar, trim any loose threads, and then go ahead and add your label if you should have a label. And now we're going to work on our sleeves. Okay, now we're going to work on our sleeves. So what I want you to do is I want you to create 2 rows of basting stitches from notch to notch. And then we're going to fold your sleeve in half, and you're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So go ahead and create 2 rows of basting stitches and then stitch the underarm seam using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so I'm going to create 2 rows of basting stitches. I'm going to back stitch at the beginning but not at the end. Pull your threads and then do another one 1/4 inch away from that line. You're going to do the same thing to the other sleeve. Once you have your basting stitches on both your sleeves, go ahead and do your underarm seam using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now go ahead and serge your seam allowance on both your sleeves. Okay, so what you're going to do is we're going to pin our sleeve to our jumper, but we created these 2 rows of basting stitches just so we can take up some of this ease here in the sleeve cap. So what I want you to do is I want you to take your threads from your bobbin, so the underneath side, and I want you to pull just a little. Now remember, we're not gathering to create ruffles or we're just taking up some of the ease. So we're just doing a little bit and then going to kind of distribute along the entire sleeve cap. And now what we're going to do is we're going to pin our underarm seam first. So pin underneath my arm, matching up those seams. I'm going to match my double notches and my single notch. And then my shoulder seam. And then if you need to pull a little bit more, you can by gathering more. The more pins you use, the better. It helps you evenly distribute that ease. Now you're going to pin your other sleeve the same way, and then using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to sew all the way around. Okay, so now using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to stitch all the way around our sleeve, going slowly because you want to make sure you don't have any tucks or pleats. Back stitch. You're going to do the other sleeve the same way. Okay, so both the sleeves are attached. I went ahead and serged my seam allowance, and I pressed the hem of my pant leg. So the bottom of this pant leg has a cuff. So you're going to turn under 3 inches, and you're going to stitch around. And then once you do that, on the inside, you're going to turn over a 2-inch cuff and then tack it down. Now you have that option if you want to do the cuff. You don't have to do the cuff. You can just stitch using whatever hem allowance you want that fits you according to whatever length you like. And then for the sleeve, you can also have the option of doing the cuff. But for my sleeve, I just turned over a 1-inch hem, and I'm going to do 2 rows of top stitching. Okay, so we are all done. As you can see, I did the 2 rows of top stitching here on the hem of my sleeves. And then for my leg, I turned under and stitched the 3 inches. And then all you have to do if you want the cuff is to turn over your cuff and then stitch on either side just to keep it up while you're wearing it. And then again, like I said, if you choose not to do the cuff, you can just turn whatever hem allowance you want and then top stitch. I hope you've enjoyed this sew along. Until next time, peace.